Imagine this, a frightened little girl looks straight at the police officer and whispers, "My dad isn't dead, he's under the floor." At first, everyone thinks it's just a child's wild imagination. But when officers bring shovels and start digging, what they uncover shocks the entire community, and reveals a chilling truth nobody saw coming. It began on an ordinary evening in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of street where neighbors waved at each other across neatly trimmed lawns, where nothing truly shocking ever seemed to happen. But on this particular night, the police were called, not because of a robbery or a fight, but because of a child. She was only 7 years old, her hair tangled, her face pale, and her eyes wide with a kind of fear no child should carry. The officers crouched down to her level, trying to soothe her trembling voice. And then, with words that silenced everyone in the room, she whispered, "My dad isn't dead, he's under the floor." At first, the officers exchanged uneasy glances. Kids say strange things, after all. Sometimes they misunderstand death, grief, or simply tell tall tales for attention. One officer even leaned toward another and muttered, "She probably means he's buried, like in heaven." But the girl shook her head furiously. "No," she insisted, tugging at the officer's sleeve. "He's under there. Right under our house. Mommy put him there." The words landed like a thunderclap. Suddenly, what seemed like a child's confused rambling carried the weight of something darker, something that could not be ignored. The officers, now visibly tense, questioned her gently. "Sweetheart, what do you mean? How do you know?" The girl's small hands pointed toward the living room floor, her voice barely audible. "I heard the digging. I heard her crying. Then she told me to never say anything. But I know he's there." The room grew heavy. The mother, who had been standing in the corner, grew defensive, her face pale but her tone sharp. "She's just a child," she snapped. "She doesn't know what she's talking about." But the girl's insistence couldn't be dismissed. The officers felt the weight of protocol pressing down on them. If there was even a chance the child was telling the truth, they had a duty to act. Still, their minds spun with doubt. Could a mother really bury her husband under the family home? Could a child really carry such a horrifying secret? One officer finally called in for backup and a warrant, his voice steady but low. As they waited, they continued to talk with the girl. She described the sound of the shovel scraping against the floorboards, the smell that began seeping into the room weeks later, and the way her mother tried to mask it with candles and cleaning supplies. Every detail twisted the knot in the officer's stomachs tighter. If she was telling the truth, they weren't just standing in a house, they were standing on a grave. And so, what began as a routine welfare check turned into the opening scene of a nightmare. The officers didn't know it yet, but the moment they decided to take the girl's words seriously, they stepped onto a path that would reveal something far more sinister than they could have imagined. By the next morning, the once quiet neighborhood was crawling with flashing lights and uniformed officers. Yellow tape stretched across the lawn, and curious neighbors whispered from their porches. The little girl had been taken into protective custody overnight, her tearful words replaying in every detective's mind, "He's under the floor." The house itself felt different now. What had once been just another modest family home suddenly seemed menacing, like its walls were holding on to a terrible secret. As investigators stepped inside, their boots echoed on the hardwood floors, each thud raising the same chilling question, was a man really buried beneath their feet? The team began by inspecting the areas the girl had described. She had pointed specifically to the living room, near the worn-out sofa and the edge of a large rug. When officers pulled the rug back, they saw faint scratches across the floorboards, marks that looked suspiciously like someone had pried them open before. One detective knelt down, running his gloved hand across the wood. "This isn't normal wear and tear," he muttered. "Someone's been here." The mother, who had been restrained outside for questioning, continued to shout that it was all a mistake, that the officers were humiliating her. But her protests faded against the sound of crowbars prying into the floor. The first plank gave way with a groan, releasing a faint but unmistakable odor. The officers froze. It was a smell no one could mistake, the sharp, sickly sweetness of decay. Suddenly, the room filled with a suffocating silence, broken only by one detective's hoarse whisper, "Oh God, she was telling the truth." Masks were quickly pulled on. Forensics was called in. Piece by piece, the wooden boards were lifted away, revealing dark soil underneath. And then, just a few feet down, something pale and unmistakably human came into view. A hand. The officers didn't move for several seconds. Even though they had been trained for this moment, there was something deeply unsettling about finding a body in the very place a family was supposed to feel safest. The excavation continued slowly, carefully. First the arm, then the shoulders, and finally the face of a man who had once been alive, smiling, eating dinner just feet above the very place he was now buried. The body was wrapped hastily in plastic sheeting, poorly tied with rope, evidence of desperation rather than planning. The little girl's words now carried a haunting clarity. She had heard the digging. She had smelled what her mother tried so hard to hide. And now, the police had proof, her father's remains, buried in the cold soil beneath their own living room. As the body was lifted out, cameras clicked, and the officers' eyes turned heavy with the realization of what they had uncovered. This wasn't just a crime scene. It was the unmasking of a nightmare, a secret sealed under the floorboards that was never meant to be found. And outside, as the mother was led away in handcuffs, her daughter's small voice echoed in every officer's head, "My dad isn't dead. He's under the floor." When the news broke, it spread like wildfire. The quiet neighborhood that had once been defined by block parties and backyard barbecues was suddenly swarming with reporters, flashing cameras, and vans with satellite dishes perched on top. Headlines screamed the same chilling story: man found buried beneath family's floorboards. For neighbors, disbelief turned to unease. They had seen the man mowing his lawn just weeks earlier, had waved to him as he left for work, and then he was gone. Some remembered asking his wife where he had been, and her answers were always vague. "Oh, he's away on business, he's visiting family." Nobody questioned it. Nobody wanted to believe that something darker could be lurking just behind closed doors. Inside the police department, the case became a grim puzzle to piece together. Forensics confirmed the body was indeed the little girl's father. The cause of death was blunt force trauma, his skull fractured in a way that told investigators it hadn't been an accident. The plastic sheeting and rope suggested a hurried attempt at concealment, and the shallow burial beneath the floor spoke to both desperation and recklessness, an act carried out in the dead of night, while a child lay awake listening to every sound. The mother, now in custody, refused to confess. At first, she denied everything, claiming she had been framed. Then her story shifted. She said it was self-defense, that years of arguments had escalated into something terrible. But the evidence didn't support her words. Her silence in the interrogation room, coupled with her daughter's testimony, painted a chilling picture of betrayal and violence. The little girl, meanwhile, became the heart of the story. In the eyes of many, she was both a victim and a hero. She had carried the unbearable weight of truth, and despite fear and threats, she had found the courage to speak. Social workers ensured she was placed with relatives, far from the house that had become a crime scene. But what no one could see, what no camera captured, was the toll it took on her. For a child to learn that safety was an illusion, that love could be shattered by violence, and that her own home could hide death under its floors, was a trauma too great to measure. Still, as police officers who had once doubted her watched her leave the precinct hand in hand with her grandmother, they felt a quiet respect. Her words had not only uncovered the truth, but had also given her father the dignity of finally being found. In the weeks that followed, the house was emptied, boarded up, and eventually sold. But for everyone who had lived through the story, its floors would forever hold the memory of what had been hidden beneath them. And for the officers who had once thought her words were nothing more than a child's fantasy, the case became a haunting reminder: sometimes, the smallest voices carry the most terrifying truths.